afternoon, everyone. What do I do here?
Nothing.
Nothing, do nothing. Okay, great. Good afternoon. Some of you know me, some of you do not. I'm John Pepe. I'm from Holy Family and a member of the CMS support team. So I want to welcome you to our CMS Pledges training session that we're going to have today. This is the fourth in a series of training sessions that we've been doing. We've done client merge, we've done holiday programs, annual report, and we have a couple that I think you'll find interesting upcoming training sessions. The next one we're gonna do will be case intake, and then after that on October 23rd, I believe, is beginners treasury training. So you might want to mark your calendar and you go out to the CMS community support website. Amanda usually posts the registration there, so you can register there. But today is all about pledges. Let me start off by saying that pledges are not a new concept. We've been doing these forever. Back in the day when I first started, we used to call them promises, not pledges. And so we used to, in the situation, what we call situation today, the situation notes, we used to enter that we're pledging or promising $500 to this client when they raise their share of the funds or something like that. But it was in text form. We had no way of capturing just how many pledges were out there and what was the balance or the total amount of all those pledges. And that is a very interesting number to a treasurer. So a treasurer might have a balance of $3,000, but he or she might have outstanding pledges for $4,000. Now, not all those pledges or promises usually happen on the same day, but it's interesting for the treasurer to know exactly what's my exposure. How much do I really have in my checking account if all those pledges happen today? And so when he or she's approving a check, they're going to be very concerned about, you know, are we going to be out of funds here because I got so many pledges out there? So what we've done is pretty much automated that process. And like I said, pledges, promises, you can use any word that you want, but basically it's keeping track of what's being committed by caseworkers to clients. So I want to start off by saying that. So Amanda, how come we are not moving here? Hold on, guys, got a little technical problem. Amanda, can you come in, please?
I'm coming over.
Keyboard's not working. Hold on. I'm hitting the arrow.
You just have to click.
Pardon me?
Click there.
Click here.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I thought we start off by just defining what is a pledge. So I'm really going to give you two definitions. One is the dictionary definition and the other one is the SVDP definition. So the dictionary definition goes like this. There are really two that I found that was pretty much right on to what we'll be discussing today and demoing. It's a solemn promise or agreement to do or refrain from doing something. That's one. And then the other one is something delivered, the something being the pledge, as security for the payment of a debt or fulfillment of a promise and subject to forfeiture on failure to pay or fulfill the promise. That, to me, those two were pretty good definitions right out of the dictionary. Now, the way we define it in SVDP terms is it's a commitment to both the client and the vendor that we will pay our pledged amount. And it's usually contingent upon the client paying their agreed amount. So those are the two definitions. But what's the difference between a check request and a pledge? A check request is a fulfillment of a commitment made to the client and vendor to pay a specific amount, regardless of the amount owed by client. So let's use an example. Let's say that the client owes $300 in utility, and you say you're going to pay $100. And so you just put in a check request for $100. You're not concerned of whether or not, well, you're concerned, but at the same time, the $100 is not contingent upon the client raising the $200. And you put through a check request for the utility company and it's paid. The danger of that approach with rent, it's really not a big deal, because let's say it was a $500 amount that you were paying a leasing office and the client owed $1,500. The leasing office really cannot post your $500 check until they have all the money. So if the client doesn't raise their $1,000 in that case, more than likely the leasing office will either send you back the check or tear it up. And therefore, all you got to do is void it out, because the client needed to pay $1,500. The leasing offices typically do not accept any partial payments. Where your risk is with the utility companies. Go back to the utility example. Client owed $300. You wrote a check for $100 to the utility company. Utility company gets the $100 and they post it to the client's account. Client doesn't raise the other $200. The client gets shut off and you lost $100, because what the utility company usually does is just post it as a credit. We have never, to the best, for the years I've been working St. Vincent de Paul, ever received our check back from a utility company. So that's where your risk is when you're just making full payment. And I'm sure you know all of that. And some of you just, your conference policy is, we promise $500, we're going to pay $500, regardless of whether or not the client's able to raise their share or not. It's not contingent upon anything. So that's a check request. Let's move over to a pledge. A pledge is a promise to pay a specific amount contingent upon the client paying the amount owed minus the pledged amount. So in this example, the same example let's use with the utility company, where the client owes $300 and we're going to pledge $100, but we're not going to pay our $100 until we have verification that the client or somebody, and when I say client, I use that very generically, because the client could raise funds elsewhere from another ministry, as an example. We really don't care where they get the balance from, but they're on the hook for that $200 before we pay $100. So we're going to verify with we're going to verify with the utility company or with the client to show us the receipt that they have made their payment before we pay the $100. That way there, we know that they're not going to get shut off. And that could be the balance forward amount, that could be the total amount, doesn't matter. So that's the difference between a check request and a pledge. By the way, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and do so through the chat. And Amanda, when we get to a certain point, Amanda will interrupt me and I'll take the questions. So feel free to enter in your questions as we go along in this presentation. Then we're going to get to the actual demo as well. So here's the benefits. So for you treasurers that are out there, The biggest benefit you get, it provides visibility to future financial commitments. That's the total amount of all those pledges out there that caseworkers are making, which improves the management of your available funds. And I'm going to show you what that means when we get to the demo of how you can see all of the pledges that have been made, and also the total amount, and how your balance kind of gets adjusted to give you a true picture of what your fund level really is. From a caseworker's standpoint, it ensures that the client's balance owed is paid to avoid eviction and having utilities being shut off. I know, being a caseworker, what brings joy to me is that I was able to keep that client maybe in their apartment for 30 more days. And the way to really ensure that is that we pay some, and whether the client or somebody else pays the other, then they're guaranteed that they're not going to get evicted just because we pay. Even if the leasing office took our check for $500 and posted it, and the client was still on that hook for $1,000 and the client didn't pay it, then they're going to get evicted. And that's the worst scenario to me. What we're trying to do is keep people in their place of residence, and also keeping their lights on. And this is the way that we're pretty much guaranteed it's going to happen, is by utilizing the pledge concept. Okay, so here's the pledge process. I'm a big process guy. I think everything begins with a process, and the technology just supports it. So the caseworker first pledges funds to the client and to the vendor. That's the first step in the process. Then the caseworker submits the pledge request. The treasurer approves the pledge request. Then the caseworker requests a check when the caseworker feels comfortable that the client has raised their share of the agreed upon amount. Then the caseworker then requests a check from a pledge. The treasurer then approves the check. And the last step is kind of like just hanging out there for the treasurer to review the pledge details and balances. I'm going to show you that when we go through the demo. So that's pretty much the flow of the pledge process. Okay, here's a typical pledge scenario. John, me, the caseworker, pledges $500 towards a client's $1,000 balance, rent balance, provided that the client pays their share of the remaining balance, $500. John then notifies the vendor of the pledge amount and requests that they being the vendor, notify him when the client has paid their share of the rent. When John receives the vendor's notification, he then submits a $500 check request that he pledged. That is very, very typical. Okay, we're going to get into the demo now, and this is what we're going to demo. We're going to submit a pledge request. It all begins there. And then from a treasury standpoint, so caseworker is going to submit a pledge request. The treasurer is going to approve the pledge request. Once that's approved, the caseworker, when it's appropriate, when the time is appropriate, the caseworker will submit a check request from the pledge request. And then the treasurer approves the check request. And then I'm going to show you how you can withdraw. Let's say that the client does not come up with their share of the rent. As hard as they tried, they did not. And you want to withdraw that pledge of $200 or $500. Or you want to change it. Instead of $500, you want to pledge $800. And I'm going to show you how we do both of those. And then from a treasury standpoint, view the pledge details, outstanding balance, and adjusted balance. So that's what we're going to demo. All set? Ready? Let's go. Okay, so before I get into, we're going to work with Linda Chambers. Before I get there, I'm going to kind of like work backwards and show the treasures, because we have a lot of them on, what the picture is going to look like. Let's go to your register. Maybe if you're not using pledges, you did not notice this column right here where my pointer is. That's your pledge column. Like you got your bank statement column, you got your check register column, and this is your pledge column. What this is saying is that this, by the way, is the test system, so don't get too excited. We have $6,700 in pledges outstanding right now. So if you take your register balance minus your outstanding pledges, that equals, this is how much you really have in your checkbook. You really don't have that. You really have this if all the pledges happen. And if you want to see the details of what makes up that 6,700, here they are. Okay? So you can see the details as well. So I wanted to kind of work backwards first, so the treasurers would have this picture in their head when we start submitting pledges and this balance gets adjusted. But this is the real benefit to the treasurer, this one column, that one number right there. Because as you are writing checks, you need to at least be aware that you have $6,700 out there in outstanding pledges. That could happen. And therefore, if somebody's asking for a check for 1,000 or 2, you might want to reduce that because you might not have that money. You don't know. So at least it gives you visibility to what's being promised by caseworkers. So let's go back. Let's go to my assigned cases. We're going to work with Linda Chambers. And I kind of set this up. So I already submitted a pledge for Linda Chambers. I'm going to show you later on. I'm going to withdraw that pledge, but we're going to create a pledge. So let's get back into that scenario where John promised $500 to this client contingent upon them raising their $500. So I would probably document some of that in the situation. Then I would come over here to assistance. And instead of clicking, you see this add check request that you typically do. When you request a check, you're going to say add pledge request, which basically flows the exact same way as the check request. No really different. So we're going to put that in for rent. We're going to say our pledged amount is $500. The target for the client is $500. We can put in an account number if we want, whatever we want to do. Those are optional fields. Typically, we use the account number for utilities, obviously. And in our conference, we actually put in the apartment number so that so the treasurer will know, like we would put in apartment number 3. And then obviously, if you put that in, you have to then rekey it, which I just basically do a copy paste. And I might say mail to JP, my initials. That's all optional. You don't need to do that on check requests. You don't need to do that with pledges. Okay, it's asking me for a vendor category, just like a regular check request, no difference. And I'm just going to pick one of our harbors at East Cobb. So the process is exactly the same. But you see over here, it says the assistant type is a pledge. And then the status at this time, it's not submitted. This, just like a check request, needs to be submitted to the treasurer for approval. You really can't work with this transaction until the treasurer approves it. I'm going to show you, we're going to go there right after we say next, which will fire off an email to the treasurer just like it does for a check request, that there is a pledge to be approved in his check request work list. And we're going to go there. Okay, so it's been submitted right there. So that's all that the caseworker does at this point in time. So like I said, an email just got fired off to the treasurers, said, there's a pledge out there for you to approve. And also it would be in their work list right there. These two I already did. That's in their work list. So you can come down here, treasurer, and click your check request like you normally do, or you can click directly on the message. Either way will get you there. So we'll do it the good old fashioned way. And so here's the pledge that we just submitted for Linda Chambers, okay? And you're going to approve it. So we're going to click on it. And you see approve up there. This just like a check request, no different. What's being asked of you as a treasurer is like everything else, whether it's a pledge or a check request, you have to approve it before the caseworker could do anything with it. Okay? So you're going to approve the check, you're going to approve the pledge. It's gone out of your work list. If we go back to Linda Chambers, we're now able to work with that pledge. So that pledge is sitting out there waiting for the caseworker to take some action, okay? So once again, following the scenario, you submitted a pledge for $500. A week later, the client comes back and says, I got my $500. I've given it to the leasing office. You've done some verification. What we do is that when we submit a pledge, when we commit a pledge to a client, we send an email to the client and to the leasing office acknowledging that we are pledging $500. And in that email, we say, when you, leasing office vendor, have received the client's share, which in this case is $500, send us back an email confirming that receipt. And when you do that, that's when we'll send you our check. But we're not going to send you our check until we get that confirmation email from you. That's what we do. So we're guaranteed that when we submit our $500, the balance is gone. It's a zero balance. Client has paid their $500 because the leasing office said so, and we're about ready to pay our $500. So this is the way you convert a pledge to a check request. So for the one or two caseworkers that are out there, you would click on the pledge. Okay. This screen should look very familiar to you. It's the same thing that you see when you put in a check request. You're going to check that box that the payment information is correct. You're going to click next. You're going to check that box saying that the vendor information is correct. And then you're going to say done. And then you're going to say execute. Exact same steps you go through when you submit a check request. No different. Okay. Now, so we just submitted a check request to the treasurer. So let's go back out there, put on our treasurer hat and go to check request. There is one for the treasurer to approve. Notice over here the type. It's telling the treasurer this was a pledge that got converted to a check. Unlike this one right here, this was a vanilla check request. So the treasurer knows immediately that this was one of the pledges. Okay? So let me make sure that we're all looking at the same thing. Let me go to the register again. Okay. So the outstanding balance went from 6,700 to 7,200 for the pledges, remember? And here, if we go to Linda Chambers, there's the 220. Where did she go? Oh, because we just submitted, I'm sorry. We just submitted the $500. So it was there at 67. But as soon as we pay that check, it will go back down to 6,700. That's the issue. So let's go to, where were we? The check request. So we're about ready to pay this. So it's still showing that it's that there's $500 out there. So we're going to put in a check number like we normally do. Let's say we mailed it on today. You know what? I'm going to try something. Hold on a minute. Yeah, I'm going to try something. Hold on one second. I think what might have happened was $63.50. So it keeps changing. Chambers 220. Okay, I'm good. So let me go back here, check request. Let's finish this thing up right here. This is just submitting a check. That's all it is. Nothing, no new news here. Shouldn't be. And we're going to approve it. Okay. Pledge details. The chamber should not be in there. She's only in there for the 220, which is still true because we did have that, but the $500 is not included at all. So that's pledged. That's what's been requested. You got two tabs, by the way, treasurers. You see what was pledged and what was requested if you wanted to bounce back and forth. Okay, so let's go back to Linda Chambers. And we're going to see that we paid that pledge and there's still one pledge outstanding. Okay, let me stop there and see if you have any questions before I go on to withdrawing a pledge. Amanda, anything in the chat room?
No questions in the chat room right now.
None. Okay, hope it was that simple for everybody. Okay, the reason why I pre-staged a pledge is because I wanted to show you how to change / withdraw a pledge. The way you change a pledge is you withdraw it, delete it, and you re-enter it. That's the change. There isn't a way to change the amount from 500 to 800. You have to withdraw it, delete it, resubmit a new pledge for $800. So to withdraw a pledge, that $220 for Linda Chambers for utilities, you would click on it just like you would if this was a check request that wasn't paid that you want to withdraw. You do the exact same thing. Same screen comes up. There's nothing new here. It asks you if you want to withdraw the pledge. I said yes. And remember, when you withdraw anything, a pledge or a check request, it is a two-step process. The first part of the process is withdraw. The second part of the process is delete. And some might ask, why do we do that? Why isn't it just one step? I've asked the question myself, because I want to withdraw it. The answer I get back, and it sort of makes sense, is what if you changed your mind? What if you really didn't mean to withdraw it? It's giving you one more chance before you delete it. So In this case, I am going to delete this pledge for Linda Chambers that I had outstanding. And now, if I go to the check register, do a recalculate, sometimes I forget to do that. There you go, 6130. Hopefully we don't see Linda Chambers in this list anymore. Right, she's not there. So she's not on our pledge list anymore. Delete it out of there and it adjusted the balance. The outstanding balance now is 6130. And so you take your register balance minus your pledges, that's your adjusted balance. So from a treasury standpoint, that's the number I got my eye on. Yes, this is really what I have in my checking account, but this is all my liability, if you will, that's sitting out there. That is going to happen. Usually, you know, in our case, 99% of our pledges happen. They all don't happen on the same day, but they do happen. The client always is able to raise their share of the rent, or they make some kind of deal with the leasing office, and that's okay with us. What we want to ensure is the client is going to be in that apartment for the next 30 days. We just don't want to give people money, people being the vendors, and the client either being evicted or being shut off. We lose on that, the client loses on that. The winners are the vendors. And we just don't want them to have our money without knowing that our client is going to be okay, whether that's going to be from a utility standpoint or from a leasing office standpoint. Okay? Believe it or not, that's all there really is to pledges. It is really no different than a check request, just that you're holding that pledge until some other event happens. And in this case, the event that you're waiting to happen is for the client to pay whatever agreed upon amount you and they had agreed to. In other words, if it was $1,000, you said, I'll pay $5, you pay $5, you're waiting for them to pay the $5. Another way of saying it is that we pay the last amount. You pay whatever you're supposed to pay, and then we'll pay the remainder. And that's the way pledges kind of work. It's a great facility from a treasury standpoint. It kind of gives you visibility, insight into all the promises, pledges that are being made and what the total amount is. From a caseworker standpoint, it allows you to make sure that your client's being taken care of before you submit a check to a vendor. So there really isn't anything else to say about pledges. It's really that simple. So put some questions in the chat box for me.
Or
Anything?
feel free to come off of mute since
Yeah,
we're a
come on.
smaller group today. It's so simple that we have no questions.
How many of you be good? Let me ask a question. How many of you were aware that there was a pledge feature in CMS? I guess raise your hands in the chat box or whatever. Anybody? So nobody was aware that's on the call today that we even had a pledge feature.
Yes, this is Joe. Yes, I was aware of it, but
Okay.
we really don't use it. we just hold our check requests until we have confirmed that the payment has been made, if it's contingent on the client having to pay.
Do you see any benefit, Joe, of using pledges now?
Personally, I think it's just one extra step that I'm not going to do. It works perfectly for us. And I mean, I'll tell my treasurer about it to see if he wants it. But I personally think we're aware of what our budget is. And if we ever get tight, which we have, let's say in past years, we would never commit anything unless we had conferred it with the treasurer. If we ever got to a low balance, then maybe I would use this pledge category. But we have a healthy amount, so we feel pretty comfortable on. I just hit check request, and then when everything is confirmed, I just say submit.
Okay. Kathy, you just submitted something saying you just started to use pledges? Kathy?
We've been using them periodically, but now we're so tight on our budget that the officers meet weekly and they basically decide how much any caseworker can pledge up to, and then they need to keep track of what caseworkers are doing. So they're telling us that we have to put pledges into CMS so that we don't go over the amount in our budget.
Okay, you're a caseworker, I take it.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a treasurer on the call?
No.
No, I mean, is there a treasurer out there? That from a treasury perspective, we got the perspective from two caseworkers. Do we have a treasurer out there that can make comments of whether or not this is a feature that you would use or not use?
I'll just say that I'm so new that I'm transitioning into the treasurer position, so I don't even know if we use it. So that's why I'm just not commenting.
Okay. Any other treasurer?
I don't know that we'll use it.
Who's speaking?
And I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't know that we'll use it because most of the time we do all our checking beforehand, contacting the vendors and things like that. And
Right.
again, like we said, we just hold until we get confirmation that the client has come up with their part.
Got it.
Or we contact the other agencies that are assisting them. And if they say, yes, they're going to assist, then we go ahead and do our part.
Got it. You see, I understand all that from a caseworker standpoint. From a treasurer standpoint, if my role, my only role was a treasury, and I don't do any casework, I personally would like to know what is the total amount. You might be holding it, but there's no visibility to the treasurer of what is you and others might be holding theirs. He or she does not know the total amount of all those, unless of course they're keeping track manually, and they might be doing that. But that to me, from a treasury standpoint, is where the real benefit is. Yeah, it might be an extra step in Joe's comments for a caseworker, but the benefit to be derived is on the back end. So the treasurer is aware of the total amount of all those pledges, and they can then gauge their funds accordingly. That's where the benefit is, not so much to the caseworker, but to the treasurer. And if the treasurer doesn't see of any value in that, then that's fine. But if I was the treasurer, that would be high value to me. But that's just me, because I like to know, I know what I'm reading, I know what my register balance says, but I have no earthly idea of what the total amount of pledges / promises are out there and what they total to. So that's.
You're also a very large group. I only have about 2 or 3. This is Ann again. I only have about 2 or 3 people doing CMS intake. You have a very large group, so I could understand that.
Our very large group consists of 6 people totally.
Well, then you don't have a large group. You're just like we are.
We really don't. I wish you were right, but we really don't.
COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
It cut
Yeah.
a lot. It was a lot of people's way of saying, oh yeah, okay, I'm finished.
No. We have one treasurer who, like really gets focused on the numbers. And to him, that is a very important number. As a matter of fact, what he does is if we have a pledge that's outstanding more than 30 days, he just goes in there and kills it off. because he wants the money back in his checking account. So, and we usually try to keep up with the clients to make sure, sometimes it's not going to happen the next day, might happen 2 weeks later, might be 3 weeks later. But when the case gets to be 30 days old, we need to check back. I said 30 days. He actually does it 60 days. We as caseworkers, usually as a trigger after 30 days, we'll go back to the client and ask for a status of where they are before we close the case. So our treasurer, we only have one. That number is very, very important because sometimes we get very low and he wants to know what's his liability out there if he continues to approve checks. But that's the way we operate. Others do it very, very differently. Some could care less, and that's fine. If that number is not meaningful to you, then this probably is not a good feature for you to implement. I would only implement it if you get some value out of it. If you get no value and all you're doing is creating additional work, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. Any other questions or comments? We have none.
Hey, John,
Yes.
this is Kay
Hi, Kay.
from Transfiguration. We
Yes.
don't use it because we don't issue the check that when client or caseworkers request some large amount or whatever the amount, 500, whatever. Presidents have to approve it. And also if it's over 550, treasurers has to approve it. So therefore, we don't need to use pledge, pledge in the system, because we will not, treasurer will not approve the issue the check unless we have money.
Okay. That's fine. Well, no, that's the way you operate. I mean, like I said, this is not for everyone. Again, I go back to the old e-records days, so I could go back to 2009, 2008. Back then, we used to, and maybe still today you're doing it, in our caseworker notes, we would record that we promised the client X amount of dollars. And that was fine. We always had that in our notes so that when the client comes back and says that they've raised their share, we just cut the check for the difference. But you had no way of knowing what did that all total up to. You just didn't, because that was just a text field.
Mhm.
And all this feature does is give you visibility to that amount. That's all it does. And if that's an important number, like I said, to a treasurer, great. If it's not, then don't do it. If that's not going to mean anything to you, it's not going to change behavior either way, then you shouldn't implement pledges.
It's a very good feature, but it's more work for the caseworkers. They have to request a pledge request, and then later when the client come up to their portion of money, then have to convert that to the regular request.
Well,
I don't.
Well, it's really not, if you think about it. What does a caseworker do? They first submit a check request, right?
Right.
So in lieu of submitting a check request, they now submit a pledge request. So same work, no additional work. Then when so that was the check request. And of course, the treasurer goes off and approves the check request. The caseworker is out of the picture because it gets paid eventually by the treasurer. But the additional step would be for the caseworker to come back and just submit a check request. That's the additional step. Versus just submitting a check request is a one-step process. Submitting a pledge and converting it to a check is a two-step process.
Mhm.
That's the additional work, if you will.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself,
John,
yes,
oh, sorry, go ahead if you want to finish.
no, I'm done.
Okay. Mary had asked, can you send a copy of the letter that you send to the client and vendor? Can
Oh,
we
sure.
share that with them? afterward?
Yeah, I can. It's fairly generic. What I do is I'm a big copy and paste kind of guy. So I created like a little template. And because I'm doing this all the time to different leasing offices. And so I just copy, paste it into another email and change the name, change the apartment number, change the amount, and off it goes. So that's what I do rather than create a new email all the time. I just copy and paste it and then just change a few of the items in the email. But I'll be glad to share with you what I have. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep, no problem.
We'll send it out afterward to everyone who registered.
Yep.
Well, that was an easy
Anything
one.
else? That's it. Okay, well, thank you
That's
for your time.
Yeah, John.
Thank you, John.
What, Amanda?
Thank you, John. Hang in there, John. Anne is going to hang around. She has a question for you offline.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, Amanda and John. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Kay. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, John, man.
You
Thank you.
bet.
Bye, Amanda.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Ann.
Hi.
Yes.
Since I've done my audit, I did my first audit. You were a treasurer at one time, weren't you?
No, I was not. I was a
Okay.
president. I was a president at one time.
Okay. So I really need a treasurer, I think. So there's a John K too, isn't there within our somewhere? Maybe that's who I need to contact. And I was just going on you with being John.
Okay, what's your question?
All right, in the audit, one of the lines says, is the CMS expense category classification correct? And so when I had my people do, this is my first time doing it. So when I had them do it, the only way to know is to go back into CMS. Now I have paperwork, like the CMS paperwork that the intake people did. I have those and I have the receipts, but I thought, well, and then I got to thinking after I did this, I thought, well, maybe there's a way I can print the screen when I'm approving a check. And then that shows me where the category classification, what we were paying. But there's no way to print the screen unless I copy the computer screen and print screen. And so I thought, well, maybe I can go back into the case. I didn't have any option to print anything.
Okay, so let me first let me understand the problem or what you're trying to accomplish. So the auditors are questioning, they're looking at, I assume, the monthly financial report where
Yeah.
we list the expenses.
Let me see if I can, wait a minute, let me see if I can show it